Welcome to Ask Earl Anything 27. And this is take 2 on that. Today's show, we got a lot of different questions, so I'm going to get right on into it. Remember, your questions make the show, and when you ask questions, the show's just that much better. So this week I've got a bunch of questions and things I want to talk about. So let's jump in. First question comes from what happened to Andre. Now, Andre asked this question last week, and I didn't slip it into the last show. I should have. And this question is a question about concert toms. He said, are the stainless steel wrapped kits from the 70s fiberglass or fiberglass wood, or were they offered in both? I suspect you know, thanks. Now, he's talking about my Pearl fiberglass drums. Here's what I know about the Pearl fiberglass drums. Up until 1980, it's the 1980 catalog for sure. It might have been 79 because in 1979 they started making the 7/8 hardware that you'll find on my Gretsch drums, okay? And up until that 1980 catalog, all the concert toms came in fiberglass. In 1980, they started making maple shell drums. And prior to that, they didn't make maple shell drums. Their drums were made of 9-plies, I believe, mahogany back in the 70s. So the 70s kits have got a different vibe than anything that comes into the 80s. So if you find Pearl drums with the old Rogers style Pearl mounts, and I'm calling them because they were kind of like Rogers mounts were back in the 70s with the I think it's a hexagon shaped rod going into the tom. Basically what you had going on there was drums that were made with Philippine mahogany, I believe. So that was kind of common for the drums made by Pearl during that time, or they did a wood fiberglass, which would be the wood with fiberglass inside it. And then of course the concert toms were all fiberglass. So 1980 they introduced the maple shell, and it was in that catalog that you started to find the maple concert toms. Prior to that, maple concert toms were not around as far as I know. I believe they were all fiberglass. So Andre, I wanted to answer that question on camera because I know somebody probably wanted it. So let's jump into question number 2. And I'm trying this new lapel mic, but I have to be honest. I got a little sunburn yesterday when I was out working outside, and it keeps touching it, so I'm having a load of fun with the lapel mic. But I think the lapel mic is going to make things a little bit easier for me to mix the volume of the show before I put it on camera. Okay, the next question comes from All Classic Drum Covers. Tony, how you doing? And he asks, what's your take on kick drum? How important is it to use properly? Now, I'm not sure where you were going with this question, Tony. I mean, do I think it's important to use a kick drum? Playing rock music, I think kick drum's really important. Playing jazz, it's important to play kick drum too, but it has less of a role than rock music. Now, if you're talking about foot technique for playing a kick drum, I think there is some important technique things that we can work on playing kick drum. One of the things that a lot of great players do is they pull the beater off the head all the time. John J.R. Robinson, I've said this his name before, famous session drummer, requires that of his playing. When he hits the drum, he pulls it back off the drum. He allows it to come back. But a lot of guys, when they play kick drum, their kick drum technique is burying the beater. And I will tell you that that is a certain sound, okay? So you have to find what works for your foot, all right? I will tell you, when you start thinking about sound like jazz, when I'm playing jazz, I always play flat foot, and I do not bury the beater. I kind of hit the beater and kind of feather it so I get the big fat bass drum sound. But your technique for playing bass drum could be flat foot or toe, and then there's all little variations between the toe and how you use the ankle and all that other stuff. So that's something you really want to think about. And as you can see, it's really driving me crazy, so I'm moving it. Oh, didn't work. Let's try it again. Lapel mic might work. There we go. Hopefully it works. I don't look as cool, do I? I got a ruffled shirt. I'm sure you guys all know I don't look as cool ever. So, but Tony, Mike Vazano's going to be picking on my ticks today. I've got tons of ticks today. I'm touching my face, my nose. Trust me, I'm aware of it right now. I don't know if that's what you wanted, Tony, but that's kind of where that's the answer I came up with for your question. I think it's important that you develop some kind of technique on the bass drum. Just realize that when you're playing into the bass drum and burying the beater, that's a technique. It may not be proper for all styles of music, just like sometimes a feathered bass drum doesn't sound cool on funk, but I can tell you a guy like J.R. Robinson, who's played on a gazillion hit records, the way he hits his foot on a bass drum, and he's done it on funk, R&B, fusion, jazz, pop records, it always sounds great. So I think pulling the beater off the head is probably the proper technique, and I will say that burying the beater is an effect. Now, I will tell you that the tuning of the bass drum will also affect it. My drum right now still has a lot of stuff inside it. I took a little bit of the stuff out recently, but I still don't have a bass drum where it's got a big boomy sound because I'm using a 14 by 20. So this kick drum's got a 14 by 20. And you can make this 14 by 20 sound huge. As you all know, that on my covers, my kick drum sounds huge. But what I have found in this studio is that when I play it wide open, it's a lot harder to get that really poppy, punchy sound than if I put a little muffling in it. And that's what most studio guys found out in the 70s. I've got a 70s approach to how I mic a bass drum. I think if you're using 3 mics and you're going to blend the mics together, you know, large diaphragm condenser, dynamic kick drum mic inside the drum, and then maybe one of those room mics or something else away from the drum, or you have a tunnel built, you might be able to get all kinds of cool sounds. But I can tell you, I do pretty low production on my drum covers in that the fact that I have mics for the toms, overhead mics, snare. As you can see, I've got a hi-hat mic. And one of the reasons I have a hi-hat mic this week is that I'm working on a project, and my client, for lack of a better term, my friend who's using me on this session, wants to have a hi-hat mic to mix. So I brought the hi-hat mic in. So I'm using a C1000 for the first time in a long time, and you know, it sounds awesome. So the C1000 is a great mic, AKG. So I think I went on a tangent, Tony, but hopefully I covered most of what you were looking for there. All right, the next question comes from my friend Mikey V. He says, hello, Earl. Good show. Here's my question. What kind of cymbal cleaner do you use, and how do you use it? All right, cymbal cleaner. I don't use a lot of cymbal cleaner, Mikey V. Okay? And by the way, I want to shout out to Mikey V. You should check his channel out. Mikey is one of the premier heavy metal type guy drummers on the channels. So if you have not seen Mikey's covers, you need to check some of them out because he can really play double kick. He's got that heavy metal thing down. I've been working with Mikey on some brush technique. So we've had a couple Skype lessons, and he's been helping me with some Final Cut stuff. So thank you, Mikey V, and a shout out to Mikey V. Check out his channel. It's definitely worth watching. He's a really great drummer. But in actuality, I don't clean my cymbals. I will tell you with Pistes, there's something called Groove Juice, and I got a little sample of it in some kind of a package kit that somebody gave me of, it was a Sonar, it actually was a Sonar. You're a Sonar player, Mikey. It was a Sonar kit, and basically it came with some Groove Juice, and then it had the paste to go on the cymbals. So there was 2 types of cleaner. And by the way, all right, back again. This is the kit. I did an album project. It took 2 years to do it. My friend Gene Alexander, and he went to the local music store, and they had one of these, and he picked one up. He said, "Here, you need this," and he sent it, gave it to me. So this is the last cymbal cleaning I've done. So anyhow, This, I think, is the Groove Juice type stuff because it's not Zildjian cymbal cleaner, even though it looks like it's in a Zildjian thing. So it's more like a polish, I guess. And then there's this Unipro metal points, okay? And again, there's a couple other things. There's some oil in it and some Vaseline for your lugs. It's a cool little kit. I don't know if you give them with every Sonar drum kit, but anyhow, it's called the cleaning set, and then there's the rag. So you can see I've used the rag a little bit. But you take the paste and you put it on and you clean them up. I normally don't do it very often, but I will tell you this China cymbal was pretty dirty, so I used it on the China and it really worked very nicely on it. I have taken the Groove Juice, and I'll just show you how I use it. And Groove Juice is basically a little bit of drip on it, right? And basically, you take it and you go around the cymbal to clean, okay? And I have done that on my Pisces, and it doesn't take off any of the logos, which is what you guys don't want to do, all right? You just take it around, and it takes off some of that stick marks. And I have done it on this cymbal a couple times, so I'm not afraid to do it. I don't do it very often, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of cleaning cymbals. But I know some guys want their cymbals pristine and clean. One of the best ways to keep your cymbals pristine and clean is to handle your cymbals with gloves. And I would say handle your cymbals with like a cloth glove versus a rubber glove, because rubber gloves I think may leave some marks. But basically, I've used all the gels. I've used the Zildjian cleaner. I've used the Paiste cleaner. I've used this paste here. They're all about the same, the paste out there. I'll tell you what you don't use, and I have used, is Brasso. I did it on some older cymbals a long time ago in a land far, far away. But I would not recommend Brasso. Anything that rough is going to take your logos off. And if you don't want to lose your logos, you don't use Brasso. All right? But, yeah, that's a couple ideas for how to do it. If you're just polishing, the Groove Juice does work really nice. If you really want to get the deep clean, you're going to have to use one of those pastes on it. And you rub the paste in, and it's the same technique. You go with the grain of the cymbal, the lathing pattern of the cymbal, and then I'll clean your cymbals. But again, I don't do it very often unless I got a really nasty one. This is a 18-inch China type from 1984. And my friend Steve Dupree gave it to me. We traded a Zildjian Crash for that. And it's a beautiful cymbal. I still don't think I got everything off of it, though. To be honest, it was pretty dirty. It'd been sitting around. But this side's a little bit dirtier. I still can't get some of these marks out. But it really did shine it up. It looked nice on the cameras anyhow. Nobody ever said that cymbal doesn't look as nice as your other one. So, all right. Let's go. The next question. Thank you, Mikey, for that question. That was awesome. All right, Mike Luke asked a question. This is a great question, too. Mike Luke asked a question for my next episode. He says, you've been playing for 40 years, right? How did your overall setup change over that time? That is, number of toms and cymbals. Looking back into the 60s and 70s, drummers used to have basic setups. One up, one down. Then in the 80s, it got big and huge. 5 or 6 toms, tons of cymbals. Nowadays, setups tend to be more basic again. I hear a lot of people saying that big setups are more for show-off purposes, and that small setups force you to focus on important stuff. I get the point for touring drummers, transportation. But what's your call on that? Great question, Mike. Great question. Growing up in the 70s, was the beginning of you needed to have a bigger kit. My first kit was a 5-piece kit, but when I had an opportunity, I bought 2 concert toms. I was watching that concert tom video I did a long time ago with the pearl fiberglass toms, and I think I talked about my first Vistalite kit being 12, 13, 16, but the concert toms I said in it was a 6 and an 8. It was actually an 8, 5.5 by 8, and a 6.5 by 10 were the concert toms. So I had 5 toms. When I bought this Gretsch kit, I had a 12, 13, 14 by 14, 16 by 16, so I still have 2 floor toms. And then I eventually bought an 8 and a 10 for the 80s. So I had kits that basically had those larger, amounts of toms. I will tell you that a lot of guys played them all and used them all, and then there were guys that didn't. And I did a show once with a band I was in called Saved by Grace back in 1988, and we played at a theater called the Count Basie Theater in Red Bank, New Jersey, and we were the opening act for 3 bands. And the one band came in from Atlanta, and the guy had a single kick. I think he had 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18. Okay? But his drums were set up in a way where you really couldn't play the 8 and the 10 because you had cymbals over top of them, so they were getting in the way. And the worst one was the 15. The 15 was literally, you had a ride cymbal right there where my ride cymbal is, but the 15-inch tom was all under it. You couldn't hit the 15-inch tom. And I said to him, "What are you doing? I mean, I can't even hit that drum." He goes, "It's just for show." So there were guys that did it for show. That was a very common thing. I didn't get hired for a band because I didn't have 2 bass drums, okay, and enough toms. So there were guys that wanted the look, and they'd hire drummers for the look, I will tell you, in my career, I've had discrimination about getting hired based on the size of my kit and the size of me. I was in a band where they didn't like the size of me. They wanted somebody who was 165 pounds and 6 foot. Didn't matter if you played well or not played well. They wanted a look that went with the band. That was the 80s. The 80s were the hair band years. Okay. Again, the guy was an okay player. I didn't think he was a better player than me, but they made it known to me that really what they wanted was a guy that was thin. That was what they were looking for. So there was a lot of that kind of discrimination. We deal with those things in life, and I'm not going to kid that doesn't go on today. The look is part of what a guy is going to get hired for on a show. I mean, if I was trying to get hired for any gig, I would not be dressed the way I am here right now. You'd want to have a much hipper appearance. So appearance does matter. Drum kits did matter back in the day. Now, today, I think it's hip to have a small kit. I mean, it's gotten to minimalistic kits now. Now you've got kick drum, snare drum, you've got some crazy stacks and a couple crashes and a ride and a china and, and maybe a floor tom and no high tom. It's gotten minimalistic now. It's gotten crazy. Unless you're playing metal music, and then you got to have the kit. So it all depends on what you're doing. And that's going to be the key to your playing. But I've played all different size kits on gigs. I've taken big kits out. I used to love taking out 3 toms up top, 1 floor tom. Most stages didn't fit 2 floor toms. I was doing a lot of weddings and stuff in the 80s and up into the 90s. So once I started transporting a lot of drums, you start thinking about what you got to bring to a gig, But if you're doing that big show, you want to have the big kit, and you want to have the big cymbals, you want to have everything. So that's part of the show, and I'm not going to lie, you got to have some gear for the show, but when you get into the studio, it's basically 2 toms, usually maybe 3, unless you're Simon Phillips, and Simon Phillips plays the same kit live as he plays in the studio pretty much. And that's Simon's preference. And you know what? If I was Simon Phillips, I would do that too. But I'm not Simon Phillips. So anyhow, Mike, that was great. Thank you. Great question. The next question comes from Tony at All Classic Drum Covers. And Tony asks, tempos in the 60s are very difficult to keep time. I think that's what he said. Tempos at 60s are very difficult to keep time. Great episode. Great story on the tight fit on the stage. No, I don't think you wanted me to. I'm going to cut some of this, of course. All right. Here's the question. Have you ever had an embarrassing time playing where your throne broke or you fell off your drums? I'm curious if you had fallen. I had fallen in my drums by jumping up on the seat and knocked over some cymbals, hit the bass player's bass, and put a chip in his new bass. Oh, Tony. That's part of the rock and roll show. Not everybody appreciates the Keith Moon stuff. But have I ever fallen off a stage? I know I've come darn close to falling off a couple stages, that's for sure. I know that feeling of being right there on that edge. I don't remember ever falling off a stage. I'm trying to think about embarrassing moments. I'm sure there were a few embarrassing moments over my career. You know, the one thing, if you're playing a lot of gigs, you're going to have moments where something happens. Oh, I know the story I wanted to go to. I was thinking about this, Tony. I really was. My most embarrassing moment was I was probably about 22. I was almost engaged to my wife. And I had a gig. I was filling in for a friend on a big band gig. A big band gig where I thought I had the time right, the start time right. But I didn't have the start time right. Matter of fact, I was off by a solid hour. And when I should have been there to set up. So I actually showed up when the gig just started. And there's nothing worse than coming on a bandstand where you're the sub drummer and you've got 18 people looking at you, including the guy who hired you and everybody else. Now, they're relieved that a drummer showed up, and they played the first two tunes without drums, okay? But I set my drum kit up, and then it was charts over here, and I had to basically pull my charts as we were going that first set. I was right in the hot seat. I was already in the hot seat because if you've ever played big band music and you're sight reading, you're in the hot seat. And my ear was going crazy. All I can tell you is I don't know how I got through that gig. I was so embarrassed when we got to the break. I was so apologetic. And I really think what happened was I was on the phone with my wife. I think I was sitting at a rest area. I'm darn sure I was doing that. Because I was on the Garden State Parkway somewhere, I think in a rest area. And we were talking on the phone, and I was waiting to go to this gig. I was a little early, and I ended up being late. Oh, it was terrible. That was the worst gig. The worst, most terrible thing I ever did. By the way, 3 or 4 years later, I got hired back to play on that band. He hired me back to come in and do it again. So my playing was not the problem. But boy, oh boy, I can't believe I did 2 gigs with that band after what I did to him on that gig. You know, you usually don't get a second chance in life. But flaky 22-year-old, I guess you could say that. I was definitely more responsible by the next time I got on the bandstand with him. But yeah, that was the most embarrassing moment, having people looking at me. That was crazy time. Great question, Tony. All right, next question. And this one comes from Jeff Holden. Okay, here's a question for next week. Thanks to you, I'm diving down the Peisty rabbit hole. Glad to get another fan to come down the Peisty rabbit hole with me. I've got the giant beat crashes. Next step is the hats. I've been playing nothing but new beats for 30 years. I don't want that sound anymore. I want a nice Peisty shimmer. I've heard it on so many records by Pace and Bonham, but I also need something versatile that I can take on a variety of gigs. I'm currently weighing the 2002 versus the giant beats. Could you explain the difference between the two, and are there any options I should consider? Also, could you explain to my wife that I really need, okay, here's where he's going, I really need these, and they are more important than a new clothes dryer. All right, Jeff. Well, I told you, you just got to set up that clothesline and tell her you will accept frozen jeans in the wintertime and you'll be fine. Probably not. All right, the difference between giant beats and 2002s. I will say this, if you're going to get 2002s, go for the Sound Edge. They're going to have a little bit more of that edgy pop, but I've been playing the giant beats now for a while, and the 15s, I love them. They are closer to new beats than you think. Very close to new beats. I think the Pisces are made in a new beat kind of way. And if you go for 14s versus 15s, you know, they're just going to be brighter because they're Pisces. But I find that these giant beats, because they are a thinner symbol, a little bit thinner than the Pisces 2002s, I find they're closer to that new beat sound. So I would say to you, go with the giant beats from that perspective. The 505s I have are mediums, and they have they're close within about less than 100 grams, I think, the top and the bottom. They are actually really cool light jazz cymbals, you know, the 505s. So they're a really nice cymbal too. But I think the 2002's got a thicker bottom, and they're going to be a little bit brighter for you. And if you go with the sound edge, they're going to be chickier. They're definitely different than the giant beats. But I think the giant beats are close to the older pair of new beats. Maybe not the newer ones. The newer ones are kind of chicky. I play a set in church, and I never weighed the cymbals in church, but I know that they got a lot more a lot more bite to them. I think your 2002s are going to have a little more bite. Now, if you're used to the biting new beat sound, then go with the 2002s. But if you're used to that kind of darker new beat sound, like kind of 70s-ish, like mine are kind of 70s, you may find that the giant beats kind of just fill that gap perfectly. So, isn't it cool how I can practice working both sides of the fence? I'm pretty good at this, aren't I? All right, Jeff. Thanks for the question. All right, my next question comes from AR Drummer. Hi, Adam. How you doing? He said, great upload, Earl. This was on one of my... oh, no, this was on Ask Earl Anything. He said, here's the question. Are you 100% satisfied with your current drums and cymbals that you own, or are you always looking for new and used gear to buy or try out? Well, first off, I will say I'm satisfied with everything I own, okay? I try to live in a place where I stay satisfied. That's really one of my things. I really try to stay in a place where I feel satisfied with what I have. And I could tell you right now, I can live the rest of my life and never have to buy another cymbal, snare drum, set of drums. I've got plenty of stuff. I've got way more than most people. That's just the way life is. Now, am I a human being, and would I like to have some other stuff? Sure, I'd love to. I mean, if money was no object, I would have a 1980s Yamaha recording custom kit, 1980s pre-S, you know, GAD sizes if I can find it. One of the things I almost pulled the trigger on this week was a bell brass snare drum. I am looking for a bell brass. William, Drumman 190, just bought one from SJC, and it sounds popping on his stuff. I noticed a huge difference to his snare sound. So I almost pulled the trigger this week. But again, I wasn't committed enough to go in, and I tried to make an offer, and somebody beat me because they made a better offer. But I'd love to have a bell brass snare drum. It doesn't have to be a Tama. It just has to be bell brass. Because I think that's a sound that would be really cool. I'd love to have a, Black Beauty 6.5 by 14 Superphonic, or a Copperphonic. Okay, I've even been toying with the idea of the Acrylite 6.5 by 14. But the problem with the Acrylite to me is I've got a great aluminum 6.5 by 14 drum. So why would I want to buy a 6.5 by 14 Acrylite? I think it may never get used the proper way. But sounds like a great drum. I love Ludwig snare drums. So I have a couple things I want. As far as drum kits go, the only drum kit that I really would like to pick up just for traveling and have one is a Gretsch Catalina club kit. And why a Gretsch Catalina club kit, you ask? Because the small jazz Gretsch Catalina club kit has mahogany shells, and I just find them to be so warm and fat. And I really would love to have a kit that was made of mahogany shells. So those new DWs that Russ Kunkel is now endorsing look really appealing to me, the mahogany shells. I've played a few mahogany kits, Ludwig kits, and a pearl mahogany kit that they made back in about 2000-ish, I guess it was. I was down here. I mean, I just think mahogany drums sound amazing. And I haven't got behind a Gretsch Catalina kit, even the cheapest, cruddiest, ugliest red sparkle with black stripes and offset lugs that I hate kit, that I can't get to sound fat and full. I mean, they do something right. You know what I mean? And they are really cheap, stinking drums, if you ask me. But I've played a couple of those little club kits. They're great little drums. They're not maple Gretsch. They're mahogany. And that's a different thing. So, if I was going to buy a kit, I'd want a mahogany kit. That's what I'd probably be looking for. For a while there, I was thinking I wanted a Craviotto kit made of solid shells. But I've kind of given up on that. $8,000 is not worth the drum kit to me right now. So it's not in the cards. But am I satisfied with what I have? I'm very satisfied with what I have. I think I have some great gear. And as far as cymbals go, there's always another cymbal to buy. I'd like to complete my Carope set. I'm thinking about some 15-inch Caropes. I'm really happy with my Pisces, though, I have to tell you. Matter of fact, when the bell brass fell through, it's birthday time, wife said you pick something out. I was trying to find something to pick out to replace the bell brass, and I was looking at cymbals. And I just can't think of the next cymbal I need on this Pisces setup. I got a 16, I got an 18, I got a couple 20s, got this 22, I got a 24, I got a China. I got three nice sets of Pisces hats. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there's another cymbal that I need that's a Pisces. So now I'm maybe looking at getting an Artisan Sabian or the 15-inch Caropes, you know, and that might move them over to this side of the aisle again, and Pisces on the other side. Never know. But yeah, I'm just happy with my stuff though. I'm not really wanting anything. All right, so thanks for that question, Adam. That was a good question. The next question comes from Todd Morrissey. Thank you, Todd, for asking a question. He's new to asking questions. Here's the question for next week, and oh boy, is it ever one of those questions that inspires daydreaming and maybe even a little drool. If you had your choice of any manufacturer to endorse, what companies would you choose, including drums, cymbals, sticks, and hardware? Thanks, Earl. Now, I'll be honest. If I was to get a drum endorsement, if I could get a drum endorsement, I would love to have a Gretsch drum endorsement. I will say that I've had some dealings with the Gretsch company. I used to go to Savannah, Georgia all the time for traveling. And Savannah was the office of the Gretsch company back in the 2010 to 2013, 14-ish, before they got sold to DW. Let's put it that way. They still might have a Gretsch office there because Fred Gretsch lives in Savannah, Georgia. The Ridgeland, Ridgeland, South Carolina, is right across the border of Georgia and South Carolina. So the factory's right down the street, kind of thing. I walked in there and they were just not nice people. They weren't nice to me. Okay. I asked about a catalog and something else, and they basically blew me off. I was on vacation. I stopped in. Then I stopped over there periodically. I tried to, but got nowhere. But I love Gretsch drums, and I know the new ones aren't made the same, though. So I don't know. DW maybe, you know. DW seems like nice drums, good company from what I can tell. And if I can get those mahogany drums, that'd be great. DW would be on my list, and then you get the hardware and the pedals. You know, I could switch over to DW pedals and hardware. That'd be great. I don't really have any desire to go with a Japanese company. Yamaha doesn't make their drums in Japan anymore. Actually, I'm going to take that back, and I'm going to say Tama. I just remembered this. If I could get a Star Classic kit, not a Star Classic kit, the Star drums, the ones that Erskine's playing, I think I would go for Tama in a heartbeat if I could get a Tama endorsement, if I could get those drums. Yep, just made my decision. You see, I look at a lot of stuff. I think those Star drums are amazing sounding, by the way. I have not heard a guy that plays them that doesn't love those drums. So, Tama Star drums, and then I could keep my Iron Cobra pedals, that'd be awesome. I think that would be where I would go with that. Cymbal-wise, I really like Peisty. I really like Peisty and their stuff. I'd like to go with them. But again, if you can get your hands on a Zildjian or Sabian endorsement, those are great cymbals too. There's nothing wrong with any of these cymbals. I will tell you what I would not want. I would not take an endorsement just to get an endorsement. That's for sure. There are guys that take endorsements with companies that, like, I remember a couple years back, Crush Drums. I could never see me playing Crush Drums. Or D-Drum. You know, or Peace. You know, those are drums I just can't imagine playing. Never. Cymbal-wise, I mean, I don't want an endorsement with Soul Tone or something like that. You know, I want an endorsement with a real cymbal company. That's what I'd be looking for. I'm not saying that any of those, they make bad cymbals, because I think they're all made in Turkey, so I think a lot of cymbals are good. But I don't think that's what I'd want. So I would say the major cymbal companies, preferably Peisty, Tama, Star drums specifically, the Star ones, making some great stuff. Maybe I can get a bell brass with that. That'd be kind of cool. And their hardware is great. Tama hardware is great. Tama pedals are great. Love them. And sticks, I would go with any stick company that would give me sticks or would give them to me at a good price. I would love to have a stick deal. That would be great. Even today, if I could buy sticks at a discounted price, I would love that. I would go with ProMark and D'Addario. Matter of fact, playing ProMarks today. Reason why I'm playing ProMarks today, not my Vader 5As, is because I was working on a session this week, and the 5Bs had to come out. I was playing that hard. So I pulled the 5Bs out. These are the Oak Shiraya, is that Shiraya? Yeah, Shiraya Kashi Oak. By the way, I felt it in my hands after I got done with it, and I could feel that vibration. Oak does not play nice with my hands. I like hickory better, but I needed a decent pair, and I needed some nice tips, and I needed something to give it that pop. These were working great. ProMark are great sticks. Vader's great sticks. Vic Firth. Any of those three would work. But ProMark, you go D'Addario, you get Evans heads. Okay? I like Remo heads a lot, except for I'd really like an Evans EMAD head on the bass drum. So we're talking about my personal taste. It would be Remo on the top and Evans on the bottom. But I could go with Evans G2s, you know, play Evans heads, and I'll just learn to figure out the snare head if I had to, and go with ProMark sticks. So if Evans wants to give me something, I'm here waiting for it, okay? But I have a question about heads next anyhow, but I think that kind of gives you the idea where I'm at, you know? When it comes to endorsements, play what you love. That's what I will tell you. Do not play something you hate, all right? I had a friend, my friend Pat O'Donnell, back in the day. He was playing some Canon heads. He went to Canon for a while, and they were giving him heads. Remo gave him discount. Canon was, I think, gave him heads for a while. The Canon heads are not as good as Remo. I don't care if Terry Bozzio plays them. I really don't. They're making Bozzio heads for Bozzio a different way than they make all the other heads, by the way. I played the Bozzio heads. They're a little bit better than the other Canon heads, but I wouldn't want to go with Canon. I want to go with Evans, Aquarian, or Remo. Okay, that's where I would go with that as far as heads go. And by the way, the next question comes from Steve Cox Drums, and I know that Steve Cox Drums asked me a question about heads. So he asked me this question. It's a great episode, of course. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everybody that says great episode. Thank you, everybody that likes my show. I do appreciate that. So during this week's show, I couldn't help but notice you have a couple different brands of heads on the kit. I've really been into the Evans G2 on my toms lately, the generic dry on the snare. Do you have any specific brands you gravitate towards preference-wise, or are you just using what you have available? Well, I will say this, Steve. I never use what I have available. I use what I love, and I try all kinds of stuff. So a year ago, I was playing I had an Aquarian set of heads, the modern vintage. I wanted to try them. I wanted that sound. Now, once you buy something, you're stuck with it for a while, so you play it for a bit. I pulled out the Evans Emperors the beginning of the year because I had a whole set sitting there for 2 years pretty much. So I pulled the Emperors out. I am hoping this year to go to, I think, vintage A's. The vintage Ambassadors are great drum heads, and I've had them on some of my drums. I love the way they sound. Matter of fact, I love the way Ambassadors sound these days. I don't know what's going on with my ear, but it seems like coated Ambassadors, coated vintage A's, great drum heads. The coated Emperors, great drum heads. The G2s, great drum heads. So I like the double plies, but I also like the single plies. Snare heads, I like a controlled sound dot head. That's pretty much my go-to head forever. And my favorite bass drum heads are EMADs, but I've played the Power Stroke 3s, Power Stroke 4s, the Pinstripes. Right now on this drum, I've got a Remo Ambassador on the back of this drum, and it actually sounds pretty good. I'm not kind of surprised how it's been sounding. But the EMAD, that ring, I like a lot. The Remo version of it didn't hold up, I'll be honest. So that's why I don't like about it. But if you go for the Power Stroke 4s or the Power Stroke 3s, they sound really good. I didn't dig the Aquarian bass drum heads. The ones everybody likes, the one that's Super Kick 2. I didn't have good success on the 20. Maybe it'd sound great on the 22. Okay? So it really depends on what you're putting on a drum. You know, I've heard them on 22s, they sound amazing. But the 20, it didn't do anything for me. You know, it wasn't what I was looking for. So when it comes to heads, I try all kinds of heads. I've done everything from fiber skins, Renaissance, Ambassadors. I'm always looking for a jazz head. I actually found this head called Earth Tone. I think they're made of calf. No, they're not calf. They're goat. They're not calf, because my friend who played calf told me, no, they're not calf. But they were goat heads. But they had a cool, earthy vibe because they were skin. They were actually an animal skin. I'd love to have a calf head for my snare, one of my snare drums, just to have one. But truthfully, they don't stay in tune, so you're really talking about issues with that taken out on a gig. But all-purpose Remo regular heads are great. By the way, I love pinstripe heads. I've played black dot heads. I think I've played just about every head there is out there, except for some of these newer ones that I don't want to play. Like, I never liked black heads. And I'll tell you why. I bought black pinstripes in the 80s, and they sounded terrible. I always hate the way the black head looks on the front of the bass drum, too. I have one bass drum with black on it, and it had a Gretsch logo on it. And a friend of mine who, God rest his soul, passed away a few years ago, gave it to me. It says Earl the Hammer on it. He had it specially made for me, and I put it on my kit for a long time. But the black head is not my color on the front. I'd rather have a white head on the front. I just think it looks cooler. Or an earth colored, you know, like an earthy kind of calf look. So right now I've got a modern vintage on this kick drum on the front. The modern vintage also has a nice piece of felt. I've been wanting to try those Remo with the felt tones. They look like cool heads. With just the felt strips on them, they might be actually kind of cool. So, a lot of cool stuff. A lot of cool heads out there. A lot of things to try. So most of the heads you see on my drum, Steve, have all to do with what I want to try, and really have nothing to do with what I have in the shop, except for the concert toms, because I'm not going to go out and buy concert tom heads. So you will see me throw whatever I want on those concert toms. Maybe one day I'll buy some clear heads for it. Wow. Did we get through all the questions? Did my camera stay on? Do I have to make too many cuts to the show? Will I make any cuts to the show? These are all the questions that will be answered once I say goodbye. So, until next time, please ask questions, because questions make the show. Thank you for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and remember, I want to see you back at next Ask Earl Anything number 28. By the way, in case you're wondering what that snare drum is, that is a Pearl Omar Hakim 5x13, which the guy I was working with this week wanted too. So I pulled out the 5x13. He wanted something that will crack your head off. I think it is pretty darn cracking, to be honest with you.